And this is the workshop wrap-up. And I'll ask my co-convener out of Manila, Professor Richard Jackson, to get that underway. Over to you, Richard.
To the title, we could be called. We could join Dave Wissink and become cocoa vendors. I don't wish to summarize the conference here as in much detail. This is because the papers given were all excellent. I didn't find a single one out of my range of interest. All of them were interesting. So it's going to take me a little while to digest their content and to see if I can pull out any common threads. So I hope the audience will excuse me if I make 5 points, 5.5 points actually, which are directly relevant to what was said in the conference, but which are things that I rather strongly believe are important for the industry in Papua New Guinea. The first point I'd like to make is that the industry has always been vulnerable to justifiable criticism by Papua New Guinean commentators for the one simple reason: it is foreign owned. But in recent years, at most sites nowadays, the proportion of the workforce that is itself Papua New Guinean is well in excess of 95%, and that largely many management positions now are held by skilled, highly skilled Papua New Guineans who could be recruited anywhere in the world to do their job. We're not talking here about just qualified geologists, but we're talking about qualified managers too, and of both female and male. So that the overwhelming bulk of the work in the mining industry and the petroleum and gas industry today in Papua New Guinea is done by Papua New Guineans. The only thing that Papua New Guineans don't do in the country is to own the industry. So that in a sense, James Marape's push to take back PNG is a natural evolution in the whole issue of national content. National content has basically succeeded in terms of the labor force. It's increasing and will increase further thanks to Petroleum's investments and the work of Exxon in its wonderful training center in terms of supply and logistics. And it is increasingly controlled by Papua New Guineans like Larry Andagali in terms of services to the activity. And I'm also thinking of Papua New Guinean colleagues who are in the impact assessment business, like I am, who are doing me out of a job, but no mind. So that the one thing that is necessary, which is largely outside the reach of Papua New Guineans to this day, is ownership. And therefore, I tend to disagree with Tommy Tonspol's remarks earlier in this conference that state investment in industry is probably not necessary. In some ways, I think it has to be necessary, because otherwise, until we get a group of Papua New Guinea entrepreneurs who are going to invest in the country's own mining industry, I can't see any way out of continued foreign domination of the ownership of the industry. And in that respect, the industry will remain open to criticism. The second point I wish to make is this, and there are lots of examples to back me up on this in the proceedings of this workshop. Every site has lots of things in common with all other sites, but ultimately every site is different. This is particularly true in terms of post-closure sustainability. Just think of trying to do a closure plan for Octedi compared to doing a closure plan for Wafi-Golpu. Just think of doing a closure plan for Simberi as opposed to doing a closure plan for Harmony Gold's operations at Hidden Valley. The potential at the different sites for economic activity post-closure are very, very different. It's also true that each site is quite different in terms of benefit distribution. They have things in common, but there are differences between them. This was raised by, I think it was David Manow, in terms of the 40-30-30 split. And he pointed out that in some cases, the 40% is simply insufficient for the population in the area. Whereas in other cases, the 40% sharing out means that a very small number of people are getting very well off. So it goes further than that. Benefit sharing at different sites has different consequences, because benefit sharing is based on lines on a map. The simplest line is the line of the lease. The project lease determines who are recipients of royalties, who are the people who get priorities for training, for employment, and so forth. But if you think about that, when that model is applied to a small island community, such as Simberi or Lihir, or in the past and in the near future, by the way, since it's being redeveloped, Missima, it seems to me that the application of the normal benefit sharing pattern is likely to divide the island community into those people who are landowners and recognized as major beneficiaries, and people beyond the lines on the map, and therefore defined as non-landowners. So it seems to me that every project has to be treated as if it were, the Latin term is sui generis, a type all of its own. It's almost unique, even if it has many things in common with other sites. It seems to me that all the planning for it, including closure planning, including the benefit sharing arrangements and everything else, need to be at least slightly different from one project to another. And this is very difficult for policy to deal with, because policy usually boils down to one size fits all. There were some differences in the old Mining Act, whereby there was a special mining lease and then a plain mining lease. But there weren't many other differences. And most projects, more or less, occasionally you get a cunning developer who would try and get a mining lease rather than an SML, but because they thought it was going to be simpler for them to do that. But apart from that, really, the laws and regulations tend to apply the same criteria to a small island mine as much as they do to a large inland mine. And I have often thought that it is highly desirable to tailor make each project's own conditions within an overarching policy framework. And as I say, there are several examples of this which cropped up to my hearing in the process of this workshop. The third point I'd like to make is I fully agree, I could not agree more with the idea of collaboration. As I've just remarked, the great bulk of the mining industry's workforce in Papua New Guinea today is Papua New Guineans. These are not different Papua New Guineans from the people who are running the government, and they're not all that different. Indeed, they might be the sons and daughters of the landowners. They are Papua New Guineans. All of them have Papua New Guinea interests in mind. So it is obvious to me that it is not a question of competing, but a question of collaboration to a common goal. And even the one or two weird white guys like myself, but more especially more important people like Dave Wissink, Dave Wissink should be, if he isn't already, I hope he is. Dave Wissink is more of a Papua New Guinean than many Papua New Guineans are. And almost even the few expatriates around do have PNG interests at heart. So collaboration is really important. But I want to make a special point out of this. It's not just collaboration between national governments and national mining and petroleum gas organizations in such things as developing a national content policy. It seems to me that it should be collaboration at every site. At every site. By which I mean partnership, joint and regular meetings over the progress of each project between real partners in development. And these partners would include LLGs or DDAs, and the planning for community investment throughout the project life leading to closure, as well as the planning of closure itself, must be a joint partnership, a joint collaboration between all those parties who are interested in it. This leads directly to my next point. In fact, it's really the same point, but anyway. I spent a long time in the impact assessment business. And in that business, it became clear to me, let's say about 1990, that coming to an agreement about what to do during the life of a project, which later became formalized as the Development Forum, is only the start of the social impact assessment process. It's been made more sophisticated by the introduction of social mapping since then. And by the way, just as a diversion, I would just like to acknowledge the tremendous contribution to the industry that John Burton has made for the last 40 years, more. John invented social mapping, basically. Social mapping is now spreading around the world, and it is largely due to John's ideas. I have known John a long time, and he's a tricky character. Not tricky in a bad sense, but let's put it this way. Never get into an argument with John, because he will always win. Anyway, back from my diversion. The Development Forum is only the first stage in social impact assessment. All the way through, you need to monitor what's going on, to monitor the changes and adapting your policies and readjusting the agreements that you made uh, at the Development Forum to meet the realities of the developing situation. And just as that is the case in impact assessment, it seems to me that should be the case in the project's development too. I am describing here an ideal situation. I'm aware that this is idealistic. And I'm aware that it's idealistic because I know that when Octedi was started, a whole series of committees were established to oversee the development of that mine. But within 5 or 6 or 7 years, many of the stakeholders in it, largely national government departments, had other things to occupy their attention, and the system broke down. So that's why I know that in the past, what I'm saying would have been entirely idealistic. But I think that the time is now ripe for considering whether or not we shouldn't have genuine partnerships at each site in terms of community investment, closure, benefit sharing, and so forth, to deal with the uniqueness of each project site, and to make sure that the partnership is a genuine partnership. The next point is this, and you're going to think that I've only just thought this up, but I actually had it written down in my notes last night for what I was going to say today. You're going to think, however, it's just popped into my head because of Kate's presentation, but it's not. I've thought of this for quite a while. I would urge David Wissing mentioned in his summarization this morning that how much he'd enjoyed the session that he facilitated, and he mentioned that we only meet once a year, and perhaps we should meet more often. Well, it's very difficult to meet more often, especially nowadays. But it seems to me that virtually we should be meeting. We should have the opportunity to meet at any time. And that therefore it seems to me that it will be highly desirable for someone or some organization, and that organization is almost certainly the Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, to organize a web chat room available to community affairs, business development, and allied practitioners around the industry of Papua New Guinea, so that they can check in there for news, exchange ideas at any time. How precisely you do that, don't ask me, simple techno-peasant that I am. But it seems to me that it's obvious that that sort of resource may well be valuable to community affairs practitioners around the country, particularly those who operate at small sites and have very few colleagues. So I would rather hope that particularly the Chamber might be able to think about that and possibly develop such a site for practitioners. And the last comment I would make is simply this. It was Caesar who said this morning that the men went on and on and on, all ran over time. And I think she proceeded then to run over time as well. But anyway, actually, you could say that this workshop, like most other workshops, we don't give the speakers enough time. Perhaps the organizers, including you and me, Neville, should be criticized for this. But there is definitely a bright side to this apparent criticism, and it's this. Whenever you have these workshops, and I think this is the number 11, I think this is the 11th you've had, it's always the same. No matter, everybody wants to speak, which means that the time periods available to each speaker is cut back. And everybody has lots to say because everybody is enthusiastic. If you want to measure, in my opinion, of the success of any activity, it's whether the practitioners of that activity are enthusiastic. And it has been quite clear to me that all the participants in this conference, including people like, for example, this morning, Wapu Song, who had to apologize for last-minute entry, everybody wants to speak. Everybody has enthusiasm for the industry. And that, it seems to me, is a very good thing. And I congratulate all the speakers. And by the way, all the attendees, and I noticed just glancing down at the bottom of my screen here, that we still have, I don't know how many we have in the audience there live, but we apparently have 37 people still online after all this time, after 2 days. Usually at this time, people have all pissed off somewhere, they've gone off somewhere. To have 37 people plus the people in the audience still there today, I think is a mark of the enthusiasm people have for the work they do and the industry they operate in. And on that optimistic note, I hand you back to Neville.
I did not have to prompt anyone to give you a round of applause, Richard, so that speaks volumes. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. They should be clapping themselves.
A round of applause for everybody who has participated so far and remained with us. Thank you. Okay. And thank you, Richard, for all of that. And we're now moving to our closing remarks, and that will be delivered by Vice President of the PNG Chamber of Mines and Petroleum, Leon Buskens. Please make him welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Afternoon, through. Thanks, Neville, and thanks, Richard, for that summary. I think you've done my job already by doing the summary, and I'll just reinforce some of your points. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm aware I'm in between drinks and much needed networking after 2 successful days. And if you can see the program, I think it says strictly 1 hour drinks between 4 and 5. So I'll try condense my 15 minutes summary, conclusion, to about 10 minutes. Let me firstly sincerely thank each and every one of you for attending and your active participation. We had a total of 135 participants, 89 attended, and 46 joining virtually. And Richard, you just did the summary about 37 still online. So that's really speaks volume about the content and the quality of the speakers. So let's acknowledge that. Thank you again to all our speakers, facilitators, and our convenience in Richard and Neville. Thank you, Richard and Neville. We obviously had a rich and diverse spread of speakers starting from our government colleagues, our different project operators in terms of size, entry, age, in terms of different cycles. So the experience, the sharing, I think we all learn from each other, and certainly I did. And also key state players in MRDC and Kumul Petroleum, and including research and academia joining us from Australia. Let us also show a special appreciation to our PNG media people for the time with us. So They're still here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah.
The theme of the conference is obviously community affairs, but importantly, media workshop to bridge that gap. At this time, I'd also like to acknowledge our key landowner leaders. They've been with us since yesterday, and they're still here. Starting with Ulato, our chairlady of the Planside LO. Please, can we thank you? Really thank you for spending the entire 2 days. Peter Ano is still here. He's chairman of one of our very successful PNG mining and hospitality catering company. Peter, we acknowledge your presence. Larry Andagali and his board members, a few board members here. Again, another successful landowner company in TWL. Glenson Gila, Mawantok from New Ireland, Taba. For you, your first time to come, you prepared really well, and your presentation right down to the last toy, you came in really the meaning of transparency at another level, so looks our stuff. And also I'd like to acknowledge William Searson, MRD's director, I was just talking to him a while ago, who's senior, he's been in boards and industry, he's a geologist, but he was telling me that his father was one of those that discovered or founded Pogara back in the 1930s. So he's got a story to tell. Maybe one of these days we're going to get him to tell a story also of a country. So, looks forward to lang. For the media, I hope you have learned and shared more network and learned more. And now you can walk away with a much better story to tell. You know, everyone told their stories over the last 2 days, and you can go away because your role is so important, especially in this time, in bridging the information gap. You know, our industry, as our senior vice president said yesterday, is under siege because of lack of facts and lack of information. We're really the partner. We really, like Richard said, we're here to work with all key stakeholders, because when we work together, collaborate together, many good things will happen rather than compete with each other. To you all in the business affairs, community affairs, government affairs, and business development, let me acknowledge the great job you all do as industry colleagues, continue to do in the business of managing hearts and minds. I know, I see some of my colleagues and others that your job, you know, there's no time. 7 days a week, 24 hours, weekends, it's hearts and mind work. And the work you all do collectively as an industry, especially in this time, in the past, now, and going forward, you all really do a fantastic job here in ensuring stable operating environment. From the gates where we operate outside in the remote parts of the country to even in Mosby. So really, really appreciate the work you do in managing hearts and minds. And we all know that population and demographics are growing high expectations, growing local and international scrutiny, and you all continue to work hard with consistency, persistency, and guided by a proper code of conduct and behaviors. I think it's important because some of that behaviors, some of that proper code of conduct, in terms of safety, in terms of transparency, in terms of governance, it's obviously flowed on. And we heard about that yesterday from some of our landowner companies and some. They want to do better. They want one standard, international standard, no New Ireland standard, no Hela standard, no Pogara or Wafi standard, just one international standard. As we heard from Tommy yesterday, this is a global business, and there's only one standard for all of us to aspire to. Again, with the work you do, unlike machines in our operations, the work you all do, there's no stop and start buttons. Your work doesn't have those buttons. You all work with hearts and mind. And we're just joking during coffee out there with Phil and David that sometimes, and some of you, many of you, sometimes you even put your livers on the line to make sure the stable operating environment. I'm through. Huh? I'll start by doing some summary from yesterday, some of the key points. And firstly, with our Senior Vice President, Richard Cussman, in his formal opening address, yesterday highlighted and unpacked our strategic intent to create the understanding, generate the knowledge, and forge the relationships which empower Papua New Guinea to capture sustained nation-building benefits from its own natural resources. That's a very, very guiding light and important. So I think the last few days, since yesterday, today, that was what we were all about here, to make sure it's sustained, make sure we transfer, generate knowledge, and forge those relationships between all key stakeholders. And he also used the garden analogy as to illustrate our PNG custom, attachment to our land, and the harvesting and sharing from the land. We all know we are the most diverse nation on earth, and just by sharing and lending, there's 800 ways of managing things, and once you get through, there's 800 beautiful ways of getting outcomes and making a difference. So the garden analogy, which connects all of us, and doesn't matter which you in the islands, highlands, we all have strong attachment to our land and our environment. So what can we take away from our engagement the past 2 days? I'll just go through some of them. We learned from state agencies, in particular through MRA, MD Jerry Gary, that there are some pending changes, legislative changes, I think he said 6, and policies and changes that were needed. And I think importantly, some of those policy changes, it sounded like they haven't reviewed for a long time, and they were to do with safety and gender discrimination laws. And it was good to hear that consultation with us in the industry were important to manage unintended consequences. And we heard from the Prime Minister when we had our last webinar, his address and his summary, that it was important that as stakeholders, as key stakeholders, we all have to consult each other, because the unintended consequences can shift the dial in a negative direction for all of us. He also highlighted outstanding states mining MOA's commitment. I think he mentioned a number of 500 million. And if you look at our sector in the petroleum, there's also some amount outstanding, some 100 millions also. And for us in the industry, I think it's important that we always look at solutions, part of the solutions, because our landowners, our beneficiaries, when they feel pain, we all feel the pain also. And I'll give an example. Is a few years ago, we couldn't look at our outstanding oil MOA, so we actually suggested an innovative or new way to look at tax credit to pay out all those, because we just wanted to come out with something to help retire a lot of those. So those are sort of, I think, for us in engagement and finding solutions, always looking at solutions. Petroleum Secretary Manau gave us a comprehensive 22-page PowerPoint insight into his department, covering licenses, exploration, and also he gave us insight about decline and license surrenders, which worried him. And also the key, I think both gentlemen mentioned the key to lifeline of the industry is exploration and finding new discoveries. He also mentioned key challenges, and it's the same challenges as in the mining in terms of outstanding MOAs, his policy work in progress, and importantly, the restructure of the department to an authority, which has been on the radar for a number of years now. I think we all see that the mining department through MRA is a successful model. So we've been talking about that in industry to get a better, efficient regulator that can really help oversight us, regulate us, and also maintain and keep good people within its own department. From our project, we learn how our industry has adapted to impacts of COVID-19, and the work industry continues to do behind the scenes, supporting the government in its responses. So we've all been a major part of that, setting the standards. Initially, we were accused or mentioned about bringing COVID, as our senior vice president said yesterday, but we are applying best practice, best standards in industry, helping with independent audits to satisfy standards outside of our country also. We also learned from Joseph Gaburi shared about the Energy Authority progress. It sounded like he needs a lot of help with a small budget of $2 million, the transition from power generation to issuing licenses. On issues of benefit sharing, we saw some very detailed and insightful presentations from MRDC, Simberi, Big Taba, Lenona groups, Newcrest Mining and TWL, who are leading the way in effectively using landowner benefits with adopting proper governance, honesty, transparency, and accountability. Larry's story is inspiring, as not only his vision to build a successful landowner company, but importantly, to build a PNG iconic company that is diversifying and even exporting the business brand to Australia and the Pacific. And I think many other landowner companies want to aspire towards that, not just a landowner company, but a national top Papua New Guinea iconic company. They can sit alongside the likes of Brian Bell, alongside the likes of BSP Bank and so forth. Tommy Tomskol, country manager for Ramu Nico, provided us an insightful reminder and caution. And as he himself is a former senior state minister holding agriculture and once upon a time Petroleum also. So it was quite interesting to listen to him. And I think, Richard, you mentioned he's converted, because some of his statement was, I quite agree with you, Richard. I think having equity, it's the balance, it's keen in the game, and it's the evolution that we have to go through to ensure that we have social license, we have stable operating environment, and skin in the game. To summarize some of his key points, the resource industry is, again, global, highly competitive, highly capital intensive, technically complex, and extremely high risk. I'll give you an example. I think in our operation, the average drilling cost is about 100 million US to 150 million US. That's the average. And once in a while, depending on remote location, it can go as high as 200 million US. In kina terms, that's close to over $500 million kina. And then that's the first cost, and then your probability, rule of thumb, as you all know, is 1 in 10. So you can see it's very, very high risk, and the balance there is our taxpayers' money. I think it's important. We want it to go to hospitals and schools, not in high-risk speculative projects like this. He also challenged us or mentioned about to maintain constant open dialogue, accessibility, transparency, and clarity in our communication. So really, last 2 days, I think it meets some of that, about us coming together, talking together, sharing together, because as partners, when we all share together, work together, and using the garden analogy, we'll all harvest and share equally together. And we all know, and Tommy did give some data, the PNG resource sector dominated the last four decades of the PNG economy. And I'll repeat some of the stats or numbers which he mentioned. The sector in the past roughly accounted for about 27% of the GDP growth, contributed around 20% 7,000 employed job. And we all heard also that for each of the job we directly create, another 4 to 5 jobs are created, generated about 80% of export revenue and contributed about 10% of government revenue. And obviously the multiplier effect from all these. And he reinforced the need for all of us to work and collaborate together and find and be part of the solution. As I thought one of the key takeaways, it just reinforces our real competition is not within us, is really outside the country. As we compete, as other countries compete for foreign direct investments, and their products compete with our products. And I'll just make another example of what the industry is doing, and all of you here, and some of you are chairmen of PHAs. That has been a really wonderful partnership, private-public partnership model. And certainly with us all sets, we have chairmen and support for Hela, Southern Highlands, and now Gulf. I think David Morobe, Stanley in New Ireland. That model has been really successful in terms of supporting governance, capacity, ensuring that accounts are on time, audited accounts are on time, and also in doing so you can attract other funding to come because trust is there. We had from information provided by Dr. John Burton on social mapping, and it was good, Richard, that you shared what is done in PNG and is taken across, and we've shared that not only in PNG but across the globe. And there's many stories like that. Papua New Guinea is unique, and you all part of that. Those have gone before us, they've been part of that uniqueness in Papua New Guinea, and to bring some of those DNA and some of those experiences to share around the world in terms of identifying the true beneficiaries of our country's resources and land of the findings of specific cases on local business. We heard from Anita Togolo. Today, this morning and this afternoon, we focused on sustainability planning, which is a crucial part of any project cycle, both before projects begin and ensuring impact communities are prepared for life after. We heard of what the state is doing in the national content space. Just talking to a number of you, I think this is very much work in progress. And I was just talking to Professor Melam. Maybe the next workshop we have is specifically on local content to get more, so we really have clarity and understanding and buy-in and support ownership of local content, and also end-of-life asset planning. In many ways, I think we all appreciate, and a number of you were sharing also, that COVID-19 has been, in many ways, a blessing in disguise, because it's made us, all of us, I guess individuals, families, our operations, the country, provinces, to start seriously looking within how we can survive, how we can become more resilient, and how we can become more self-reliant. And I think that's starting to happen. You know, we're training more people, look at buying more local. If you look at our strategic intent again, is about using some of our energy to make low cost, ease of doing business and cost of doing business in terms of value adding in country also. So there's heaps and heaps of opportunities. If we can work together with all our key partners to unlock those benefits that are yet to be unlocked, but through clear national local content, transfer of skills, using technology, we can harness, especially, and some of the learnings from the first PNG LNG project, some of the learnings we can learn and apply. For a different context, COVID-19 forces PNG as a country to focus on developing internal capacity, as I said, service the private and public sector in a variety of streams, including supply chain, training, localization, communication, electricity infrastructure, to name a few. These are foundational platforms that should assist our economy grow without too much reliance on foreign imports, our energy security, food security, and skills also. While we continue to need foreign investments on a number of fronts, PNG private sector and the country at large needs a platform from which to launch its own aspirations. And last, but certainly not the least, we thank also the EITI Secretariat for the presentation on reporting. But importantly, I think the EITI is to tell the story and to empower everyone in the country, from our leaders to all stakeholders, beneficiaries in our sector, having access, empowering them with the facts and having access to evidence-based audited reports, which overall improves overall accountability. Lastly, that's my closing remarks. As part of the completion process, I just want to thank all our sponsors again. Thank Hilton Hotel. They are a landowner company. It's really good that we're having this conference in a world-class facility in Hilton Hotel, owned by our landowners, and this is a fine example of using their own resources to build a world-class facility like this, and with a world-class brand. Also, our chamber team, Professor Mellam and team, thank you. And next of kin, I think it's a local, we're already applying local content with next of kin that run all these facilities, IT facilities, big screens and so forth. They've been a partner with the chamber. To those, I've got time up, huh? To those of you attending virtually, thank you very much for your patience, participation, and commitment following our session. May God bless all of us. Please keep safe, keep well, and we'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Buskens. And thank you very much. A final big thank you to my co-convener, Richard Jackson, for keeping everything lively and keeping everything fun, but also very serious when it needed to be. And that's my final act as co-convener here at the Hilton Hotel. Thank you all again. A final thank you, and our last networking event is going to be outside, just outside these doors. Hope to see you then. Thank you all.
Thank you, Noel. Thank you.
Thank you, Neville. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Anita. You don't have any more comments, do you, Richard?
No. Send me a bottle of Carl Kitchen's artificial spirits, please.
Apologies, ladies and gentlemen. Your cocktail event this evening is proudly sponsored by Octedy Mining Limited.